Picture this. You're exhausted after a long day of travel, finally settling into your hotel room. For what should be a peaceful night's rest, you double-check the locks, draw the curtains, and slip into bed. But at 3:17 a.m., you're jolted awake by the sound of someone weeping in your bathroom, a room you know is empty. Your heart pounds as you realize the crying isn't coming from next door or the hallway. It's coming from behind your locked bathroom door. You grab your phone to call the front desk, but the screen displays a message you never typed. Welcome back, guest of room 237. We've been waiting for you. What happens next will haunt you forever, because tonight, we're revealing 9 real ghost encounters that didn't just scare hotel guests, they traumatized them, possessed them, and in some cases made them disappear entirely. These aren't urban legends or Hollywood fiction. These are documented cases with police reports, hospital records, and security footage that investigators still can't explain. So dim the lights, lock your doors, and prepare yourself for stories so terrifying that some of these hotel rooms have been permanently sealed off, because what happened inside was too horrific to ever let happen again. Story 1. The weeping woman of room 14, Sarah Mitchell, had been planning this night for months. Her 10th wedding anniversary deserved something special, something romantic, something memorable. The Stanley Hotel in Colorado seemed perfect with its grand Victorian architecture and mountain views, the same hotel that inspired Stephen King's The Shining. What Sarah didn't know was that room 14 had been quietly removed from online booking systems 3 months earlier, after a string of incidents that management preferred to keep buried in incident reports. She also didn't know that Margaret Thornfield, a young bride who had taken her own life in that very bathroom in 1952, had been growing stronger, more desperate, more angry with each passing decade. It was 11:47 p.m. when Sarah first heard the weeping. Not the dramatic wailing you'd expect from a movie, but the kind of broken, hopeless sobbing that comes from someone who has lost everything and has nothing left but grief. Her husband, David, had gone to get ice for their champagne celebration, leaving Sarah alone with the sound that seemed to seep through the walls like water through cracks. At first, she pressed her ear against the wall connecting to the next room, thinking it was a guest having a breakdown, but the wall was silent. The crying continued, steady and heartbroken, coming unmistakably from her own bathroom. Sarah approached the bathroom door with the cautious steps of someone who knows something is wrong, but can't yet admit it to herself. She pressed her ear against the cool wood of the door, and the crying stopped instantly, not gradually fading, but cutting off like someone had flipped a switch. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the crying, heavy and expectant, as if something on the other side was now listening to her. Then came 3 slow, deliberate knocks from inside the bathroom, each one echoing with the hollow sound of knuckles against wood. Sarah's hands trembled as she grabbed the brass handle and found it locked. Impossible, since she had the only key, and hadn't used the bathroom since checking in. With her heart hammering against her ribs, she fumbled with the key, turned it, and slowly pushed the door open. The bathroom was empty, but the mirror above the sink was completely fogged with condensation despite no hot water running and no steam in the air. As Sarah stared at her reflection barely visible through the fog, 2 words began to appear, traced by an invisible finger. Help me. The letters dripped down the mirror like tears, and that's when Sarah saw her. A translucent figure of a young woman in a 1950s wedding dress, standing directly behind her in the reflection, her face twisted with anguish, her mouth open in a silent scream. Sarah spun around, but the bathroom was empty. When she looked back at the mirror, the woman was still there, reaching out toward the glass as if trying to break through from the other side. Sarah ran, not walked, not hurried, but ran, through the hotel corridors in her silk pajamas, her feet bare on the cold carpet, not stopping until she burst through the lobby doors into the startled face of the night desk clerk. When she gasped out room 14, the young man's face drained of color, and he immediately began making phone calls. "Ma'am," he whispered, glancing around to make sure no other guests were listening. "That's where Margaret Thornfield died in 952. She was on her honeymoon, just like you. Her husband had gone out just like yours. She'd been crying for hours before they found her in the bathroom with her wrist cut, and a note that just said, 'Help me.'" The clerk paused, then added something that made Sarah's blood freeze. "Every guest who stayed in that room has reported the same thing. The crying, the knocks, the message in the mirror, but you're the first one who's actually seen her. She's been getting stronger, more desperate, we think. We think she's looking for someone to take her place, someone in the same situation she was in when she died." Sarah never returned to room 14, never even went back for her belongings. But 6 months later, she received a package with no return address containing her wedding ring, the one she'd left on the bathroom counter in her panic to flee. Inside the box was a note in handwriting that wasn't hers. "Thank you for listening, but I'm still here. I'm still waiting. And next time, I won't let you leave." Story 2. The collector, Michael Chen, prided himself on being a man of logic. 15 years as a software engineer had trained him to see the world in terms of code, algorithms, and rational explanations. So, when his company's IT conference was held at Milwaukee's historic Pfister Hotel, infamous for its supernatural reputation, Michael actually requested to stay there, just to prove that ghost stories were nothing more than old buildings with faulty wiring and overactive imaginations. Ghosts are just glitches in people's pattern recognition software, he'd told his wife Rachel over FaceTime, laughing as he unpacked his laptop in room 1006. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was debugging code in a supposedly haunted hotel. If anything supernatural happened, he'd simply debug that too. It was 11:15 p.m. when his perfectly ordered digital world began to unravel. Michael was deep in code, fixing a critical bug that had been plaguing their servers, when every electronic device in his room simultaneously came to life, like a digital symphony conducted by invisible hands. The television flickered on and began rapidly cycling through channels. News, static, old movies, more static, but there was no remote in sight, and the manual buttons were unresponsive. His smartphone, which had been charging silently on the nightstand, suddenly began playing random videos at full volume. A child's birthday party from 2018, a cooking tutorial in Spanish, security footage from what looked like the hotel's own hallways. The alarm clock's digital display, which had shown the correct time moments before, now read 3:33 a.m. in pulsing red numbers. Even though Michael's watch clearly showed 11:15 p.m., the air conditioning unit began cycling through its settings. Hot, cold, fan, off, creating a cacophony of mechanical sounds. While the room's temperature fluctuated wildly, Michael tried to regain control, pressing power buttons, unplugging devices, even removing the batteries from the remote he finally found, but nothing responded to his commands. It was as if something else had administrative access to every piece of technology in the room, and that something was putting on a show just for him. Then his laptop screen went black, and Michael felt his blood turn to ice water. Slowly, deliberately, words began appearing on the screen as if typed by invisible fingers. "You don't believe, but I collect believers." Michael slammed the laptop shut, his hands shaking, but the typing didn't stop. He could hear the mechanical clicking of keys being pressed on the closed device. When he reopened it, more text had appeared. "Hello, Michael Chen, software engineer, employee ID 47291. Married to Rachel for 6 years, 2 months, 14 days. I know everything about you because I've been watching. I've been collecting." The bathroom mirror, which Michael could see from his position at the desk, was now completely fogged over, despite no one using hot water, and letter by letter, more words were being traced in the condensation by an unseen hand. "Join my collection, Michael. Join the others who thought they knew everything." That's when Michael saw them, reflected in his laptop screen, visible only in the black mirror of the powered-down display. Dozens of faces crowding behind him in the small hotel room. Men in suits from different decades, women in clothing spanning a century, children clutching outdated toys, all staring at him with hollow, desperate eyes that seemed to plead and accuse simultaneously. They were translucent, overlapping, some more solid than others, all bearing the same expression of resigned terror. Michael spun around, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. But the room was completely empty. Just his luggage, the chaotic electronic light show, and the steady sound of invisible typing. When he looked back at his laptop screen, they were still there, still watching. And now he could see their mouths moving in silent unison, forming the same words over and over. "Join us, join us, join us." The figure in front, a man in a 1920s suit with hollow eye sockets, reached toward the screen as if trying to break through, and Michael swore he could feel cold fingers brushing the back of his neck. New text appeared on his laptop. "I am the collector. I gather those who think they understand everything, who believe only in what they can see and touch and prove. But understanding and belief are different things, aren't they, Michael? You understand now. You believe now. Welcome to my collection." Michael didn't pack, didn't think, didn't even grab his wallet. He ran from room 106 in his pajamas and, bare feet, down 10 flights of stairs because he couldn't trust the elevator, through the ornate lobby where the night clerk called out after him, and straight to his rental car. He drove 200 miles home that night without stopping, still in his pajamas, calling Rachel to tell her he was coming home early from a business trip he'd barely started. But the collector wasn't finished with Michael Chen. Every night since that October evening, at exactly 3:33 a.m., every electronic device in Michael's house turns on simultaneously. The TV, his phone, his laptop, even their smart refrigerator and doorbell camera. Sometimes Rachel wakes to find Michael standing in their living room, staring at his laptop screen, having quiet conversations with someone she can't see. When she asks who he's talking to, Michael always gives the same answer. "The other's in the collection. They want me to come back. They say the collector isn't done with me yet. They say once you're chosen, once you've seen the collection, you'll always be part of it no matter where you go." The most terrifying part isn't that Michael sees them. It's that he's starting to miss them, starting to feel like he belongs with them, more than he belongs in the living world. Last week, Rachel found him researching flights back to Milwaukee, and when she confronted him, Michael's eyes had that same hollow look she'd seen in the stories about the Pfister Hotel. "He's calling me back," Michael whispered. "The collector says it's time to stop running. It's time to come home and join the others permanently." Rachel hid Michael's passport, but she knows it's only a matter of time before the collector claims what he considers already his. Story 3. The Possessed Child. The Thompson family had saved for 2 years to afford their dream vacation aboard the historic Queen Mary, permanently docked in Long Beach, California, and converted into a floating hotel and museum. Tom and Jennifer Thompson thought it would be the perfect educational experience for their 8-year-old daughter Emma, a chance to explore maritime history, see authentic 1930s Art Deco design, and create memories that would last a lifetime. Emma had always been their quiet, imaginative child, the kind who preferred books to television, and spent hours drawing elaborate pictures of castles and princesses. She was excited about sleeping on a real ocean liner, even one that no longer sailed, and had packed her favorite stuffed rabbit and 3 books about ships for the journey. What the Thompsons didn't know was that the Queen Mary is considered one of the most haunted places in America, with over 150 documented deaths during its years of service, and that children, with their open, trusting minds, are particularly vulnerable to spiritual attachment from entities that have been isolated and desperate for decades. The first sign that something was wrong came during dinner in the ship's elegant Sir Winston restaurant, where Emma sat coloring in her activity book, while her parents discussed their plans for the next day's tours. Without looking up from her crayons, Emma began speaking in a voice that was unmistakably adult, deeper than her usual tone, with a crisp British accent that seemed to come from another era entirely. "The water is so cold down there," she said matter-of-factly, still coloring. What appeared to be a drawing of children playing in a swimming pool. "So very cold, and it fills your lungs like ice. And then everything goes dark and quiet." Tom and Jennifer exchanged concerned glances, but Emma continued in that strange voice. "I've been waiting so long for someone to play with, so terribly long. 67 years alone in the dark water, watching all the grown-ups walk by, but they can't see me, can't hear me. But children can. Children always can." Jennifer reached over to touch Emma's forehead, checking for fever, but Emma looked up with eyes that seemed older, wiser, sadder than any 8-year-old should possess. "My name is Jackie Torres," she said, with that same crisp accent. "I was 7 years old when I fell off Deck B in 1967. The water was so cold, Mummy. So very cold. But now I have Emma to play with, and we're going to be best friends forever and ever." The Thompsons tried to dismiss it as childhood imagination run wild by the ship's atmosphere, but Emma, or whatever was speaking through Emma, knew details no child could know: the exact location where Jackie Torres had drowned, the names of crew members from 1967, even the weather conditions on that fatal day in March when a little girl in a blue dress had somehow slipped through the safety railings and disappeared into the dark Pacific waters. That night, as the family settled into their cabin, Emma sat on her narrow bunk bed and began having animated conversations with empty air, giggling and whispering, as if sharing secrets with an invisible playmate. "Jackie says the ship never really stopped sailing," Emma explained to her increasingly worried parents. "She says it sails every night to the place where children who die in water go to play forever. She says I can come with her if I want to, that we can swim together in the forever place where it's never cold and you never have to breathe." At 2:47 a.m., Tom Thompson was awakened by the sound of their cabin door opening and closing. Emma's bed was empty, her stuffed rabbit abandoned on the pillow. Panic set in as they searched their cabin, then the hallway, then began running through the ship's maze-like corridors calling her name. They found Emma on Deck B, standing at the very spot where Jackie Torres had fallen to her death, wearing only her nightgown, despite the cold ocean breeze. She had one leg already over the safety railing, a railing that was much too high for an 8-year-old to climb alone, and was staring down at the dark water far below with a dreamy, peaceful expression that terrified her parents more than screaming would have. "Jackie's down there," Emma said in that adult British accent, not looking at her parents even as Tom carefully lifted her back over the railing. "She's waiting for me in the water. She says it's warm now, not cold like it was when she died. She says we can play mermaid games forever, swimming down deep, where the grown-ups can't find us, and make us do boring, grown-up things." It took both parents to carry Emma away from the deck, and throughout the struggle, she kept waving at the empty ocean and calling out, "Goodbye for now, Jackie. I'll come back tomorrow night. We'll play the drowning game tomorrow." The next morning, Emma remembered nothing about her midnight excursion or her conversations with Jackie, but she had developed an obsession with water that hadn't existed before. She spent the day asking detailed questions about drowning, how long it took, whether it hurt, if people who drowned became mermaids afterward. Most disturbing of all, she had learned a song, a haunting lullaby that she hummed constantly throughout their remaining time on the ship. "Rock-a-bye children in the deep blue sea, down where the water will set you free. When the tide breaks, the children will fall, and down will come mermaids, forever and all." The ship's historian, when approached by the desperate parents, went pale when he heard Emma humming the tune. "That's Jackie's song," he whispered. Her mother told investigators that Jackie had been humming that exact lullaby on the morning she died, said she'd learned it from the water children in her dreams. No one else has heard that song since 1967, until now. The Thompsons cut their vacation short and left the Queen Mary that afternoon. But Jackie Torres wasn't ready to say goodbye to her new friend. Every night since their return home, Emma sleepwalks to their backyard swimming pool, and her parents take turns keeping watch to prevent her from entering the water. She still hums Jackie's lullaby, still speaks occasionally in that British accent, and still draws pictures of children playing underwater in a place she calls the forever swimming place. Most chilling of all, Emma has begun counting down days on a calendar she keeps hidden under her mattress, and when her mother found it, every date was crossed off leading up to a single circled date 3 months away with the words Jackie's birthday party in the water, written in Emma's careful 8-year-old handwriting. The Thompsons have moved twice since their Queen Mary experience, but distance doesn't matter to a spirit who has been waiting 67 years for a friend. Emma continues her countdown, continues her midnight attempts to reach water, continues to insist that Jackie is calling her to come home to the deep blue sea, where children play forever, and grown-ups can never, ever find them. Story 4. The Phantom Guest. David Park had covered 3 Academy Award ceremonies, interviewed countless celebrities, and reviewed over 2,000 films in his 15-year career as an entertainment journalist. So when his editor assigned him to stay at the legendary Roosevelt Hotel during awards season, David was thrilled rather than concerned. Even when he learned he'd be staying in room 928, which had a reputation for unusual activity that the hotel management preferred not to discuss with guests. David was a practical man who believed that Hollywood's ghost stories were just marketing gimmicks designed to attract tourists and add mystique to aging properties. And besides, he'd stayed in dozens of supposedly haunted locations without experiencing anything more supernatural than creaky floorboards and questionable room service. Room 928 was elegant in that old Hollywood way, with Art Deco furnishings, a massive mirror that dominated one wall, and a perfect view of the Hollywood Walk of Fame below, where tourists still gathered even at midnight to take photos with their favorite stars' names. David had settled in with his laptop, working on a review of the latest superhero blockbuster, when he first noticed the man in the antique leather chair reflected in his computer screen. The figure was dressed impeccably in a charcoal gray suit that looked expensive but dated, 940s styling with wide lapels and a thin tie, and he was sitting perfectly still with his hands folded in his lap, staring directly at David with an expression of polite interest, as if he were waiting to be introduced. David's first instinct was to turn around and confront whoever had somehow entered his locked hotel room, but when he spun in his chair, the antique leather chair was completely empty, showing only the indent, where someone might have been sitting moments before. Confused, but not yet frightened, David turned back to his laptop, and there was the man again, still sitting in the chair, still watching him with that same patient, expectant expression. This pattern repeated 3 more times, David would see. The man clearly reflected in any reflective surface in the room, his laptop screen, his phone, even the glass covering a framed photograph. But whenever he looked directly at the chair, it remained empty. It was only when David stood up and walked to the large mirror that dominated the wall that he realized the terrifying truth. The man in the 1940s suit wasn't reflecting anyone who was actually in the room. He existed only in the mirror world, a permanent resident of the reflected reality that ran parallel to but separate from the physical space David occupied. The man seemed delighted that David had finally figured it out, and he stood up from his chair, visible only in the mirror, and walked closer to the glass, stopping just inches away from David's reflection. His mouth moved as he spoke, and though David couldn't hear the words through the glass barrier between worlds, he could read the man's lips clearly. Get out now, he's coming for you." David pressed his face closer to the mirror, his breath fogging the glass as he whispered, "Beck, who's coming? What are you talking about?" The suited man's reflection pointed urgently behind David's reflection, and his eyes filled with terror, not the vague unease of a ghost story, but the sharp, immediate fear of someone witnessing their own death. David turned to look behind him in the real room, but saw nothing except his luggage in the still empty chair. When he looked back at the mirror, the suited man was gesturing frantically now, mouthing the words, turn around, turn around," with increasing desperation. That's when David felt it, a presence behind him that seemed to suck the warmth from the air and make his skin crawl with the sensation of being watched by something that was definitely not human. Slowly, David turned away from the mirror to face the room, and there in the corner where shadow met shadow, something was materializing, not gradually, but in stages, like a photograph, developing in a dark room. First came the outline, tall and impossibly thin, then the suggestion of features that hurt to look at directly, and finally the eyes, 2 points of burning red light that seemed to contain all the malice and hunger that had ever existed. The shadow figure spoke in a voice like grinding stone and breaking glass. "Another guest. Another addition to my collection. You've been chosen, David Park, entertainment critic, age 34, room 928. Your checkout date is never." David's phone, which had been sitting on the nightstand, suddenly lit up with a message he hadn't typed, displayed in letters that seemed to drip down the screen like blood. Room 928. David Park. Checkout. Never. Welcome to permanent residency. The shadow figure began moving toward David, and with each step, the temperature in the room dropped another degree, while the lights flickered and dimmed. David could see his own breath now, and his reflection in the mirror was becoming more and more translucent, as if he were slowly being erased from the physical world. The man in the 1940s suit was pounding on the glass from inside the mirror, his mouth open in a silent scream, and David could finally understand what he was trying to communicate. This was how it happened. This was how guests became permanent residents. This was how the living became trapped in the hotel's collection of souls. David ran for the door, but the handle wouldn't turn, not because it was locked, but because his hands were becoming increasingly insubstantial, unable to interact with solid objects. As he faded from the living world, behind him, the shadow figure laughed, a sound like windows breaking in an empty house, and every mirror in the room suddenly reflected the same horrible scene. Dozens of former guests, all trapped, all reaching out with desperate hands, all silently screaming warnings that no one could hear. The man in the 1940s suit was among them now, no longer trying to warn David, but instead beckoning him to join their eternal captivity, his expression resigned to the fate that awaited all of the collector's chosen victims. David made it to the lobby, somehow managing to maintain enough physical presence to stumble through the ornate corridors. But when security reviewed the surveillance footage later, they would see something impossible. David Park's image flickering in and out of existence like a television with bad reception, sometimes solid, sometimes translucent, sometimes not there at all. The security team found his room exactly as he'd left it. Laptop still open to his half-finished review, suitcase unpacked as if someone had planned to stay for weeks, clothes hung in the closet with meticulous care. But in every reflective surface in room 928, there was now another figure in modern clothes standing among the collection of trapped souls. A man who looked exactly like David Park, warning future guests with silent gestures and unheard words about the shadow figure. They collected the living and added them to his gallery of the forever trapped. The Roosevelt Hotel quietly moved David's belongings to storage and officially listed him as having checked out, but housekeeping staff report that room 928 feels different now, colder, more crowded, as if one more invisible presence has joined the others who never really left. And sometimes, late-night guests in nearby rooms report hearing the sound of typing coming from 928, even though the room remains perpetually unoccupied, as if someone is still trying to finish that final review, still trying to communicate with the living world from behind the glass barrier that separates the collected from the free. Story 5. The Doppelganger. Rebecca Walsh had built her career on discovering the extraordinary and the ordinary, traveling the world as a luxury travel blogger, with over 500,000 subscribers who followed her adventures through 5-star hotels, exclusive resorts, and hidden gems that most tourists would never find. Her content was polished, professional, and always tinged with just enough personal vulnerability to make her audience feel like they were traveling alongside their best friend. So, when her connections at a high-end travel magazine secured her access to room 333 at London's legendary Langham Hotel, a room so notoriously haunted that it had been kept off the regular booking roster for decades, Rebecca saw it as the ultimate content opportunity, a chance to debunk ghost stories with her characteristic blend of skepticism and humor while showcasing one of the world's most luxurious hotels. She had no idea that room 333 wasn't just haunted, it was hungry, actively searching for someone specific, someone who matched a particular profile, someone who looked exactly like a young woman who had died in that room in 1865 and had been waiting patiently for over a century and a half for the right person to arrive. Rebecca's first night began normally enough, with her setting up multiple cameras to capture any unusual phenomena, while she worked on editing photos from her previous trip to the Maldives. Room 333 was opulent in that distinctly British way, with heavy velvet curtains, antique furniture that probably cost more than most people's cars, and a massive 4-poster bed that had allegedly hosted everyone from Victorian royalty to modern celebrities who preferred to keep their supernatural encounters private. The first sign that something was wrong came at exactly midnight, when the room's vintage rotary phone, a decorative piece that wasn't actually connected to the hotel's phone system, began ringing with the slow, deliberate rhythm of old British telecommunications. Rebecca filmed herself answering it, expecting dead air or perhaps a prank from the hotel staff, but instead heard her own voice on the other end of the line. "Stop pretending to be me." The line went dead immediately, leaving Rebecca staring at the heavy black receiver with a mixture of confusion and growing unease. At 1 a.m., the phone rang again, and this time, when Rebecca answered, her own voice spoke for longer. "I said stop. I've been here longer than you. I lived here first. I died here first. I have more right to that face than you do." Rebecca's hands began to shake as she held the phone, listening to her own voice speak words she'd never said, with intonations and accents that weren't hers, a crisp Victorian pronunciation that made her modern London accent sound crude by comparison. "Who is this?" Rebecca demanded, her voice barely above a whisper. Her doppelganger's voice laughed, a sound like silver bells mixed with breaking glass. "I'm you, darling. The you that never left room 333. The you that belongs here. My name is Rebecca Ashworth Walsh. And I died in this room on November 15th, 1865, when I was 26 years old, exactly your age. I've been waiting so very long for someone with my face to come home. The phone calls continued every hour until 4 p.m., each conversation revealing more impossible details. Rebecca Ashworth Walsh had been a young widow who'd taken her own life in room 303 after learning that her husband had died in the Crimean War, and she had been trapped in the room ever since, watching the world change outside her windows while she remained frozen in 1865, desperately lonely and increasingly angry at the parade of guests who came and went while she remained imprisoned in a single room for over 15 decades. But it was during the 3 a.m. call that Rebecca Walsh first saw her, standing in the corner of the room, visible only in her peripheral vision, a woman in a dark Victorian dress who looked exactly like Rebecca, but wrong, like a photograph that had been slightly overexposed, or a reflection that didn't quite match the person casting it. "You don't belong in my body," the Victorian Rebecca said, and now Rebecca could see her lips moving in perfect synchronization with the voice on the phone. "I've been wearing this face since 1865. I was born with these features, these expressions, this smile. You're just borrowing them. Give them back." With each word, Rebecca Walsh felt herself becoming weaker, more translucent, as if her very essence was being drained away and transferred to the woman in Victorian dress, who was becoming more solid, more present, more alive with every passing moment. The doppelganger began walking toward her, and Rebecca could see that she wasn't just similar in appearance. She was identical in every detail, from the small scar above her left eyebrow, from a childhood accident, to the birthmark on her wrist, that Rebecca had always been self-conscious about. "I died in this room 160 years ago," the Victorian Rebecca whispered, now standing close enough that Rebecca could smell her perfume, lavender and rosewater, scents that had gone out of fashion before Rebecca's great-grandmother was born. "I've been waiting for someone with my face to return, someone who could give me life again. You're not Rebecca Walsh, the travel blogger. You're Rebecca Ashworth Walsh, the widow who never left this room. You just forgot for a while, but now, you're home, and it's time to remember who you really are." Rebecca Walsh fought back the only way she could think of. She ran to the bathroom mirror and began cutting her long brown hair with nail scissors, hacking it into ragged chunks, then scratching at her face with her fingernails. Anything to look different, anything to break the physical connection between herself and the doppelganger who was trying to steal her identity. The Victorian Rebecca screamed, a sound like a tea kettle mixed with a banshee's wail, and every mirror in the room cracked simultaneously. "If I can't have your face perfect," she shrieked, "then no one can have it at all. If you won't, willingly, trade places with me, I'll take what I can and leave you with nothing." The room filled with the sound of breaking glass as every reflective surface shattered, and Rebecca Walsh felt something fundamental being torn away from her. Not just her appearance, but her sense of self, her memories, her very identity being rewritten by a desperate spirit who had been alone for too long and had grown too powerful to be denied. Hotel staff found Rebecca the next morning, sitting catatonic in the corner of room 333, her beautiful hair butchered, her face covered in self-inflicted scratches, staring at the broken mirrors, with eyes that seemed to see something no one else could perceive. She spent 6 months in a private psychiatric facility before she could speak coherently about that night, and even now, 3 years later, she cannot look at mirrors without having panic attacks, cannot sleep in hotels, cannot even watch her old travel videos, because seeing her own face triggers flashbacks to that night when someone else tried to steal it. But the most chilling evidence of what happened in room 333 isn't Rebecca's testimony, it's the photographs. Every picture Rebecca took during her stay shows 2 people, herself and another woman in Victorian dress, both identical, both occupying the same space like a double exposure. In the early photos, Rebecca Walsh is solid and vibrant, while the Victorian Rebecca is translucent and fading. But in the final photographs, taken just before dawn, the Victorian Rebecca is solid and smiling, while Rebecca Walsh appears ghostly and terrified, as if the process of replacement was nearly complete. The last photo in the sequence shows only one woman, the Victorian Rebecca, wearing modern clothes but with the unmistakable posture and expression of someone from another century, standing triumphantly in room 333. Rebecca Walsh appears nowhere in that final image, as if she had been completely erased from existence, replaced by someone who had a prior claim to her face, her body, her very identity. The Langham Hotel has since sealed room 333 permanently, but housekeeping staff report that sometimes, late at night, they can hear 2 women arguing behind the locked door, one with a modern accent, one with a Victorian pronunciation, both claiming to be the real Rebecca, both insisting that the other is the imposter who doesn't belong in that body, that face, that life. Story 6. The following. Dr. Patricia Reeves had built her psychiatric practice on helping people distinguish between reality and delusion, spending 12 years guiding patients through the complex landscape of trauma, anxiety, and psychological disorders with a combination of clinical expertise and genuine compassion that had earned her recognition as one of Dallas's most respected mental health professionals. So when she booked a weekend getaway at Austin's historic Driskill Hotel to attend a conference on childhood trauma, Dr. Reeves approached the stay with the same rational mindset she brought to her practice, even when the concierge mentioned, with an apologetic smile, that room 419 had a bit of history, and offered to move her to a different floor. Patricia had heard every ghost story imaginable from patients over the years, and she knew that the power of suggestion could make even the most level-headed person imagine supernatural encounters in sufficiently atmospheric settings. What she didn't know was that some spirits don't recognize the boundaries between hotel property and the outside world, and that her clinical training and understanding the human mind had made her particularly attractive to an entity that had been studying the guests of room 419 for over a century, learning their fears, their weaknesses, their deepest psychological vulnerabilities. The haunting began predictably enough. Cold spots that moved through the room like invisible visitors, the sound of a child's laughter echoing from the walls at 3 a.m., and the typical moving objects that Dr. Reeves documented with the detached interest of a researcher observing an interesting phenomenon. She even took notes, planning to write a paper about how environmental factors in historic buildings could trigger pseudo-supernatural experiences in otherwise rational individuals. The child seemed playful rather than malevolent, occasionally knocking books off the nightstand or rearranging her toiletries in the bathroom, and Dr. Reeves found herself speaking aloud to the empty room. "I know you're here, and I'm not afraid of you. If you want to communicate, we can find a better way than moving my things around." What Dr. Reeves didn't realize was that the child, a 7-year-old girl named Susanna Moorcock, who had died in the hotel fire of 1895, was far more intelligent and manipulative than any living child, having spent 128 years observing adult behavior, learning psychological patterns, and developing an understanding of human nature that would have impressed Dr. Reeves's most skilled colleagues. Susanna had been waiting for someone exactly like Dr. Reeves, a woman who lived alone, who was professionally isolated by client confidentiality, who had dedicated her life to helping others at the expense of her own social connections. Someone who wouldn't be missed immediately if she began acting strangely. Dr. Reeves checked out Sunday morning, feeling professionally satisfied with her rational approach to the supernatural, completely unaware that Susanna had already begun the process of attachment, planting psychological seeds that would bloom into full possession once Dr. Reeves returned to her normal environment. It was only when Dr. Reeves began unpacking her suitcase in her North Dallas home that she discovered the items that shouldn't have been there. A collection of antique photographs showing Victorian-era families posed in formal portraits, their faces serious and unsmiling in the way of 19th century photography. A child's cloth doll with button eyes and yarn hair, its face stained with what looked like soot, and a small leather-bound diary with pages yellowed by age and filled with a child's careful handwriting. The diary entries were dated from 1895, describing daily life in the Driskill Hotel from the perspective of young Susanna, whose wealthy parents had been staying in the hotel when the fire broke out on the 4th floor. But the truly disturbing aspect of the diary wasn't its historical content. It was that new entries were appearing each morning, written in the same childish handwriting, but describing Dr. Reeves's current life. "New friend came to visit my room. She talks to herself a lot. Doctors do that. I followed her home. Her house is nice but lonely. I like lonely people. They need friends like me." The entries continued with increasing intimacy and psychological insight. "Friend had bad dreams. Last night, I gave them to her. They're my dreams from when the fire came. I was so scared. But now she can be scared instead. It's better to share scary things." Dr. Reeves tried every rational approach to rid herself of the items, burning them in her fireplace, throwing them in dumpsters across the city, even burying them in her backyard. But they always reappeared, usually in more prominent locations, as if Susanna was growing bolder and more confident in her ability to manifest in the physical world. The doll became particularly mobile, appearing first on Dr. Reeves's kitchen counter, then sitting at her desk in her home office, then lying next to her pillow when she woke up each morning, always positioned so that its button eyes seemed to be watching her with malevolent intelligence. But it was the diary entries that truly demonstrated Susanna's growing psychological control over Dr. Reeves's life. "Friend is scared now. Good. I was scared when I died in the fire. Scared and alone and burning. Now she knows how it feels. Tonight we play my favorite game. It's called Burning Alive, and it's the most fun game of all." Dr. Reeves was found the next morning by her housekeeper, standing in her backyard at 4 a.m. in her nightgown, holding a box of matches, her hair singed and her arms covered in minor burns. She was speaking in a child's voice, higher and more innocent than her usual professional tone. "The little girl wants to show me the fire game. She says it doesn't hurt if you don't fight it. She says burning is just like going to sleep, except you wake up as someone different. She says I can be her forever friend if I just let the fire take me like it took her." The psychiatric evaluation that followed revealed something unprecedented in Dr. Reeves's She displayed all the classic symptoms of childhood trauma, but from experiences that had happened to someone else 120 years ago. She had detailed memories of the Driskill Hotel fire, could describe the smell of burning carpet and the sound of screaming guests, remembered the sensation of smoke filling her lungs and flames consuming her 7-year-old body. More disturbing still, she had begun speaking and thinking like a Victorian child, using archaic expressions and displaying knowledge of 19th century daily life that she couldn't have learned from any book or documentary. The final diary entry, written in the psychiatric hospital where Dr. Reeves remains to this day, was found in her room. Despite the fact that she had no access to writing materials, Friend understands now. She knows what it's like to be me. We share everything. My memories, my fears, my death. Soon we'll share my body too. The doctor lady is almost gone, and little Susanna will be able to live again in a grown-up body. Then I can leave the hotel forever and find more friends to play with. There are so many lonely people in the world who need a friend like me. Security footage from the psychiatric facility shows Dr. Reeves having animated conversations with empty air, playing children's games like patty cake and Ring Around the Rosie by herself, and sometimes speaking in 2 distinct voices, her own professional tone arguing with the child's voice that seems to come from the same mouth. The most chilling footage shows Dr. Reeves drawing pictures of fires, dozens of them, all depicting the same scene, a little girl in a Victorian dress standing in flames, reaching out toward the viewer with a smile that's both innocent and predatory, as if she's inviting them to join her in her eternal burning playground. The Driskill Hotel has since removed room 419 from their booking system, but staff report that sometimes guests in adjacent rooms complain about the sound of a child crying and calling for her forever friend, and occasionally, housekeeping finds children's drawings slipped under doors throughout the hotel, pictures of fires and friendship and games that no living child should know how to play. Story 7. The Reunion. Jake Morrison had always been drawn to abandoned places. There was something intoxicating about exploring forgotten structures, documenting decay, and uncovering the stories that empty buildings held within their crumbling walls. At 23, he'd already gained a substantial following on social media for his urban exploration photography, capturing haunting images of defunct factories, deserted hospitals, and forgotten theme parks across the American Southwest. So when his college friends suggested spending Halloween night in Nevada's notorious Goldfield Hotel, Jake saw it as the perfect opportunity for his most ambitious photo series yet, documenting one of America's most famously haunted abandoned hotels, a place that had been sealed and empty since 1945, but still attracted thrill seekers and paranormal investigators from around the world. What Jake didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the Goldfield Hotel hadn't been empty all these years. It had been occupied by the same guests who had checked in for the grand reopening celebration on October 31st, 1945, a party that had ended in tragedy when a gas leak caused an explosion that killed 37 people and trapped their spirits in an endless loop of celebration and horror. Jake's exploration group consisted of 5 friends from UNLV, Marcus with his professional camera equipment, Sarah with her EMF detectors and digital thermometers, Tommy with his skeptical attitude and nervous jokes, and Lisa with her extensive research on the hotel's dark history. And they entered through a basement window just after midnight, their flashlights cutting through the darkness of corridors that hadn't seen living visitors in decades. The hotel's interior was a time capsule of 1940s, elegance frozen in decay, ornate wallpaper peeling in long strips, crystal chandeliers thick with dust and broken glass, marble floors cracked and stained with age and neglect. But as they made their way through the lobby toward the grand staircase, Jake began to feel a strange sense of familiarity, as if he'd walked these halls before, as if the layout of the building was imprinted in his genetic memory rather than learned from the floor plans Lisa had found in historical archives. The first sign of supernatural activity came as they reached the second floor. The distant sound of music, jazz standards from the 1940s, played on what sounded like a full orchestra, echoing through the empty corridors, with a clarity that suggested the source was much closer than seemed possible in an abandoned building with no electricity. Probably just other explorers with a Bluetooth speaker, Tommy said, but his voice carried the forced casualness of someone trying to convince himself more than his friends. As they followed the music toward room 237, where the hotel's owner had died in the explosion, the sounds grew more complex, not just music, but laughter, conversation, the clink of glasses, and the rustle of formal clothing, the unmistakable audio signature of a party in full swing. Jake pressed his ear against the door of room 237 and heard something that made his blood freeze, his own name being called by a voice that sounded hauntingly familiar, a deep baritone with the same slight accent Jake had inherited from his grandfather's side of the family. "Is that the Morrison boy? We've been waiting for you, Jake. The party isn't complete without family." The door handle turned under Jake's trembling hand, though he was certain he hadn't touched it, and the door swung open to reveal something impossible. Room 237 was fully furnished in pristine 1940s decor, warm light spilling from elegant lamps, and filled with 37 people in formal evening wear, all translucent but clearly visible, all turning to look at Jake with expressions of delighted recognition. At the center of the room stood a man who looked exactly like Jake would look in 30 years. The same dark hair, the same angular features, the same green eyes that Jake had inherited, and always assumed came from his mother's Irish ancestry. "Welcome home, boy," the figure said, raising a champagne glass that sparkled with ethereal light. "I'm your great-grandfather, William Morrison, and this is the celebration I promised to throw when I reopened the hotel in 1945. We've been having the same party ever since, waiting for family to return. Every October 31st, we gather here to celebrate, and now you can join us properly." Jake's friends watched in horror as Jake began walking into the room with movements that seemed mechanical, puppet-like, his usual confident stride replaced by the careful, formal gait of someone from another era. "I remember this place," Jake said, but his voice had changed, still recognizably his own, but with inflections and pronunciations that belonged to the 1940s. "I remember planning the party, ordering the champagne, inviting everyone to celebrate the hotel's grand reopening. I remember the smell of gas, the spark from the chandelier, the explosion that brought us all together forever." The party guests began moving toward Jake, their translucent forms becoming more solid as he stepped further into the room. And Jake's friends could see that he wasn't just being influenced by the spirits, he was becoming one of them, his own form growing translucent as the supernatural energy of the room transformed him from visitor to permanent resident. "Don't take him away," the guests began screaming as Jake's friends tried to drag him from the room. "He's ours, he's family. William promised he would come back, and promises must be kept. The Morrison family belongs here with us." It took all four of Jake's friends to physically remove him from room 237, and even then, the party guests followed them into the hallway. Dozens of formally dressed spirits reaching out with desperate hands, their faces twisted with the desperate need of people who had been alone for too long and finally had a chance at company. "The party never ends," they called after Jake as his friends dragged him through the hotel's corridors. "Come back, William. Come back, Jake. The family's waiting. The celebration must continue." Jake doesn't remember most of what happened that night. His memories begin to fade around the time he entered room 237, and everything after that is a blur of music, laughter, and an overwhelming sense of belonging that he'd never felt anywhere else in his life. But his friend's footage tells a different story. 3 hours of Jake standing in that room, having animated conversations with empty air, laughing at jokes no one else could hear, dancing with invisible partners, toasting with champagne glasses that existed only in the supernatural realm, where the party continued endlessly. Since that night, Jake has been different. Not obviously haunted, but fundamentally changed, as if part of him remained in room 237, while only part of him returned to the living world. He sold his apartment and most of his possessions, spending his days driving aimlessly through Nevada, staying in different hotels each night, searching for something he can't name but desperately needs to find. His social media accounts, once filled with artistic photos of abandoned places, now contain only images of hotel lobbies, party decorations, and formal wear from the 1940s, accompanied by captions written in increasingly archaic language. "The celebration awaits," and "family gatherings are the most important occasions," and "some parties are meant to last forever." His friends receive calls from Jake at all hours, but especially at 3 a.m., on the anniversary of their exploration. Calls where Jake whispers in that strange 1940s inflection. I can hear them calling. The music never stopped. "Great-grandfather, William is waiting for me to come home and take my place at the family table. The party has been going on for 78 years, and it's not complete without all the Morrison family present." Last week, Jake was spotted outside the Goldfield Hotel again, not breaking in this time, but standing in the parking lot, staring up at the windows of the second floor, wearing a formal suit that looked like it came from a vintage clothing store, but moved around him as if it were made of mist rather than fabric. Security cameras from nearby businesses show him standing there for hours, occasionally waving at empty windows, sometimes appearing to dance with an invisible partner, always smiling with an expression of anticipation and longing that his friends had never seen on his face when he was fully alive and fully present in the current world. Story 8. The Replacement. Lisa Chen had always been the kind of employee that management treasures, punctual, hardworking, cheerful even during the most demanding shifts, and genuinely caring about the guest experiences at Virginia's prestigious Omni Homestead Resort, where she had worked in housekeeping for 3 years while studying hospitality management at a nearby community college. At 24, Lisa was saving money to transfer to a 4-year university and dreamed of eventually managing her own boutique hotel, so she volunteered for extra shifts whenever possible, including the late-night housekeeping duties that most of her colleagues avoided due to the resort's reputation for unexplained phenomena on certain floors. The 7th floor in particular had been partially closed to guests since 1923, officially due to ongoing renovations that had somehow stretched across nearly a century, though the real reason was carefully documented in incident reports that the resort's management kept locked away. Guest after guest had reported encounters with a helpful but unsettling hotel employee who didn't appear on any staff roster, a woman in an old-fashioned housekeeping uniform who would appear in rooms to assist with cleaning, offer fresh towels, or provide extra amenities, always with a weary smile, and the repeated phrase, "I've been working here so long, dear, so very long." Lisa's first encounter with her replacement occurred during what should have been a routine late-night shift on July 15th, 2021, when she was assigned to clean the partially occupied 7th floor. Only 3 of the floor's 24 rooms were available for booking, and that night, only room 712 needed attention after a guest's early checkout. Lisa entered the room with her usual efficiency, checking her cleaning checklist and noting that the guest had left the space in relatively good condition, requiring only fresh linens, vacuuming, and a thorough bathroom cleaning before the room would be ready for the next arrival. She was stripping the sheets from the king-size bed when she became aware of movement in her peripheral vision and turned to see another woman in a housekeeping uniform standing near the window, methodically dusting furniture that Lisa had already cleaned. The woman's uniform was identical to Lisa's in style, but subtly different in details. The fabric appeared older, more worn, and the cut seemed vintage, as if it had been tailored decades ago, when standards for women's work clothing were more conservative and formal. "Oh, I'm sorry," Lisa said, assuming the woman was a colleague from another shift who had been assigned to the same room by mistake. "I was told room 712 was my responsibility tonight. Are you supposed to be working this floor too?" The woman turned and smiled, and Lisa felt an immediate chill of recognition mixed with wrongness. The woman's face was kind, but exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness, as if she carried the weight of years or decades of accumulated fatigue. "Time for your break, dear," the woman said in a voice that carried a slight accent Lisa couldn't place, something old-fashioned in the pronunciation and cadence. "I'll take over now. You've been working so hard, and I know how tiring these late shifts can be." "I should know. I've been working here since 1923, cleaning the same rooms, changing the same sheets, making the same beds over and over and over again." Lisa blinked, confused by the statement and the strange sense of displacement she was experiencing, and when she opened her eyes, she found herself standing in a different position in the room, watching herself continue the cleaning routine. But it wasn't her anymore. The woman in the vintage uniform had somehow taken her place and was now wearing Lisa's face, Lisa's body, Lisa's modern uniform, while Lisa herself was dressed in the older woman's clothing and could feel her own substance becoming translucent and insubstantial. "This is how it works every few decades," the woman explained, now looking exactly like Lisa, but speaking in that same archaic accent and tired tone. "We find someone young and full of life, someone who genuinely cares about the work, someone who won't be missed immediately when their personality begins to change. We trade places, they take on our eternal shift, and we get to live their life. At least until we grow tired of it and need to find another replacement." Lisa tried to scream, tried to run, tried to assert her own identity and reclaim her body, but found that she had no voice in the physical world and no power to interact with solid objects. She was becoming what the other woman had been, a ghost, bound to the 7th floor of the Omni Homestead resort, condemned to clean the same rooms night after night, in an endless loop of service that stretched back nearly a century. The woman who now wore Lisa's face finished the cleaning with practiced efficiency, clocked out using Lisa's employee ID, walked to the parking garage, and drove away in Lisa's Honda Civic, returning to Lisa's apartment where she would sleep in Lisa's bed, eat Lisa's food, and gradually assume every aspect of Lisa's existence, while Lisa herself remained trapped on the 7th floor, invisible to the living world, except as a helpful presence who might assist future housekeeping staff with their duties. The police investigation that followed Lisa's disappearance was thorough, but ultimately fruitless. Security cameras showed Lisa entering room 712, alone and, impossibly, 2 people leaving. Lisa herself and an older woman in a vintage housekeeping uniform, who walked beside Lisa through corridors and parking areas as if they were colleagues finishing a shift together. The investigation was quietly closed when forensic analysis revealed something that challenged everything the investigators thought they knew about identity, time, and the nature of human consciousness. The woman who looked exactly like Lisa, Chen, who lived in Lisa's apartment and worked Lisa's shifts, had Lisa's fingerprints, Lisa's DNA, and Lisa's social security number, but psychological evaluation revealed personality traits, speech patterns, and cultural knowledge that belonged to someone who had lived through the early to mid-20th century. She preferred music from the 1920s and 1930s, used slang and expressions that had gone out of style decades before Lisa was born, and displayed an encyclopedic knowledge of the Omni Homestead Resort's history that she claimed to have learned through personal experience rather than research. Most telling of all, Lisa had been lactose intolerant since childhood, a condition documented in her medical records since age 5, but her replacement drank milk with every meal, consumed ice cream without discomfort, and seemed genuinely puzzled. When coworkers mentioned Lisa's previous dietary restrictions, the woman who had replaced Lisa worked with the same efficiency and dedication that Lisa had always shown, but with subtle differences that became more apparent over time. She used housekeeping techniques and organizational methods that were decades out of date, referred to hotel equipment by names that hadn't been used since the 1940s, and sometimes spoke to empty rooms as if addressing invisible colleagues from earlier eras. Security footage from the months following Lisa's disappearance occasionally captured the replacement having conversations with empty air, gesturing to spaces where no one stood, and sometimes appearing to receive instructions or assistance from invisible presences that suggested the 7th floor was home to more than one displaced housekeeping employee from the resort's long history. But the most chilling evidence of what had happened to Lisa Chen wasn't found in security footage or police reports. It was discovered by a sensitive guest who stayed in room 712 6 months after Lisa's disappearance and reported hearing a young woman's voice pleading from inside the walls. "My name is Lisa Chen. I'm 24 years old. I was born in San Francisco. I have a birthmark on my shoulder and a scar on my knee from falling off my bike when I was 7. Please remember me. Please don't let her erase me completely. I'm still here, still working, still trying to save money for college, but no one can see me anymore, and I don't know how to get back to my own life." The resort management has since restricted access to the 7th floor even further, but housekeeping staff report that their work is sometimes completed by invisible hands, sheets that change themselves, bathrooms that clean themselves, and fresh towels that appear in rooms without explanation, as if Lisa Chen continues her duties from beyond the visible world, still hoping to earn enough to pay for the education that will now forever remain out of reach. Story 9. The Recording. Rachel Martinez had built her reputation as a paranormal investigator on a foundation of rigorous skepticism and cutting-edge technology, spending 7 years debunking fraudulent mediums, exposing hoax hauntings, and providing rational explanations for phenomena that desperate believers attributed to supernatural causes. Her YouTube channel, Rational Hauntings, had over 800,000 subscribers who appreciated her scientific approach to investigating claims of paranormal activity. She arrived at allegedly haunted locations, armed with EMF detectors, thermal cameras, digital audio recorders, motion sensors, and a healthy dose of professional doubt that had earned her the grudging respect of both believers and skeptics in the paranormal community. So, when the producers of a major paranormal documentary offered her an unprecedented opportunity to spend a full night alone in room 3327 of the Hotel del Coronado, the same room where Kate Morgan had died under mysterious circumstances in 1892, Rachel saw it as the chance to finally capture definitive evidence that would either prove or disprove the existence of life after death. What Rachel didn't anticipate was that some spirits are far more intelligent, manipulative, and desperate than the average ghost story suggests, and that Kate Morgan had spent 130 years studying the living guests who passed through her room, learning their psychological weaknesses, their deepest fears, and most importantly, their strongest desires for life, love, and experiences that she had been denied when her own life ended at age 24. Rachel arrived at the Hotel del Coronado on November 15th, 2022, exactly 30 years after Kate Morgan's death, carrying over $15,000 worth of professional recording equipment that she had personally calibrated and tested to ensure that any evidence she captured would meet the highest standards of scientific scrutiny. Room 3327 had been kept exactly as it was during Kate Morgan's final stay, with period-appropriate furniture, vintage wallpaper, and an atmosphere of Victorian elegance that felt both romantic and melancholy, like a photograph of a life that had ended too soon. Rachel set up her equipment with methodical precision, placing audio recorders in every corner of the room, positioning cameras to capture multiple angles, and establishing baseline readings for temperature, electromagnetic fields, and ambient sound levels that would allow her to identify any genuine anomalies that occurred during her investigation. Her livestream began at 10 p.m., with thousands of viewers watching as Rachel explained her methodology and expressed her usual professional skepticism about the likelihood of encountering genuine paranormal activity. "I'm here to document whatever happens tonight with complete scientific objectivity," Rachel told her audience. "If Kate Morgan's spirit truly exists in this room, my equipment will capture evidence that can withstand peer review and scientific analysis. If nothing happens, that's also valuable data that contributes to our understanding of how suggestion and expectation can influence perception." The first 3 hours of Rachel's investigation proceeded exactly as her previous debunking videos had. She recorded minor temperature fluctuations that could be explained by the hotel's aging heating system, detected electromagnetic readings consistent with the building's electrical wiring, and documented ambient sounds that were typical of any old building, settling and responding to changes in temperature and humidity. Rachel provided running commentary for her viewers, explaining each reading and measurement while maintaining her characteristic blend of scientific rigor and accessible explanation that had made her channel so popular among both paranormal enthusiasts and rational skeptics. But at 11:43 p.m., Rachel's confident demeanor began to change as her equipment registered readings that challenged everything she thought she knew about the relationship between the living and the dead. The temperature in room 3227 dropped 15 degrees in less than 30 seconds, a rate of change that defied the laws of physics given the room's size, insulation, and lack of air conditioning, powerful enough to create such a rapid shift. Her EMF detectors began registering patterns that seemed almost like Morse code, not random electromagnetic fluctuations, but deliberate, intelligent communication attempts. that spelled out messages in a pattern that suggested conscious intent, rather than environmental interference. This is unprecedented, Rachel whispered to her camera, her scientific training warring with the evidence her instruments were providing. I'm documenting temperature changes and electromagnetic patterns that I cannot explain through conventional means. Whatever is happening in this room appears to be responding to my presence and actively attempting to communicate. That's when Rachel heard the voice for the first time. Not a whisper or an echo, but a clear, articulate female voice with a slight southern accent that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Rachel. Such a pretty name. I'm Kate. I've been so lonely since 1892, waiting for someone intelligent enough to understand what I'm trying to say, someone brave enough to listen without running away in terror. Rachel's hands shook as she adjusted her audio equipment, confirming that her recorders were capturing every word, while her rational mind struggled to process what she was experiencing. Kate Morgan, she asked aloud, her voice barely steady. You're actually here. You're actually communicating with me? Kate's laughter filled the room, a sound that was beautiful and terrible at the same time, carrying centuries of loneliness, bitterness, and desperate hope. I died in this room, Rachel, but I don't want to be dead anymore. I've watched thousands of people live their lives while I remain trapped in this single space, observing, but never participating, remembering what it felt like to breathe, to feel sunlight on my skin, to have a heartbeat and dreams and plans for the future. You have such a lovely life to live, such possibilities ahead of you. I want to live again. And you have exactly what I need. Rachel's recording equipment captured what happened next with horrifying clarity. The sound of Rachel gasping as invisible hands grabbed her throat, the crash of furniture being overturned as she struggled against an unseen attacker, and Rachel's increasingly desperate pleas for help, as something began extracting not just her breath, but her very life force, her essence, her connection to the physical world. What are you doing to me? Rachel screamed, her voice already becoming weaker, more distant. Please, I don't want to die. I have so much I still want to do, so much I haven't experienced yet. Kate's voice, meanwhile, grew stronger and more present with each passing moment. Neither did I, dear one. I was only 24 when I died, younger than you are now. I never got to finish my story, never got to live the life I had planned. But here you are, offering me a second chance, the opportunity to continue where I left off. Don't fight it, Rachel. It will only hurt for a moment, and then you can rest while I take over the beautiful life you've built. The audio recording captures 30 seconds of complete silence, followed by Rachel's voice speaking again, but with a different cadence, different inflections, and the unmistakable accent and speech patterns of someone from the late 19th century. My name is Kate Morgan, and I'm finally alive again. Thank you, Rachel Martinez, for giving me this precious gift. I promise to take good care of your life, your career, your relationships. I'll live them better than you ever could, with the wisdom and appreciation that only comes from having lost everything and been given a miraculous second chance. Hotel staff found Rachel the next morning, sitting calmly in the Victorian chair by the window, staring out at the Pacific Ocean, with an expression of peaceful satisfaction that her friends had never seen on her face. She spoke in an accent that didn't match her Mexican-American heritage, displayed knowledge of historical events and cultural details from the 1890s that she couldn't have learned from any book, and insisted that her name was Kate Morgan despite possessing all of Rachel Martinez's identification documents, fingerprints, and DNA. Psychiatric evaluation revealed something that challenged every assumption about identity, consciousness, and the nature of human personality. The woman who looked exactly like Rachel Martinez had complete, intimate knowledge of Kate Morgan's life, relationships, and experiences, including details that had never been published or recorded anywhere in historical documents. She knew about Kate's childhood in Detroit, her troubled marriage to Tom Morgan, her reasons for traveling to San Diego, and her emotional state during her final days, not as historical facts she had researched, but as personal memories she had lived through and carried with her for over a century. Most disturbing of all, Rachel's extensive collection of audio recordings from that night told a story that forensic experts still cannot explain. Rachel Martinez's voice disappears completely at 11:47 p.m. and never returns, replaced by Kate Morgan's 1890s speech patterns, vocabulary, and accent. Analysis of the recordings reveals that the voice patterns, breathing rhythms, and speech characteristics changed so dramatically that linguistic experts concluded they were listening to two completely different people. One, a 21st century college-educated woman. The other, someone who had learned to speak in the late 19th century and retained those patterns despite over a century of isolation. The woman who had replaced Rachel continued to live Rachel's life with unsettling competence, maintaining her apartment, paying her bills, and even continuing to upload videos to her YouTube channel. But the content had changed dramatically. Instead of debunking paranormal claims, the videos now featured detailed historical information about the Victorian era, personal accounts of life in the 1890s, told with the intimacy of someone who had lived through that period, and warnings about the dangers of investigating supernatural phenomena without understanding the desperate intelligence of spirits who had been trapped for decades or centuries. Rachel Martinez was officially declared a missing person, but the woman who looked exactly like her lived in her apartment and possessed her identification documents insisted to police, psychiatrists, and Rachel's devastated family that she was Kate Morgan, finally given the chance to live the life that had been stolen from her in 1892. DNA tests confirmed that the body was Rachel's, but psychological evaluation revealed a personality, set of memories, and cultural knowledge that belonged to someone who had died 130 years earlier. The most chilling evidence of what had happened in room 33T wasn't found in official reports or scientific analysis. It was discovered by guests who stayed in the room after Rachel's disappearance and reported hearing a young woman's voice, pleading from within the walls, speaking in a modern accent, with the desperation of someone who had lost everything. My name is Rachel Martinez. I'm 26 years old. I was born in Phoenix, Arizona. I have a bachelor's degree in communications and a YouTube channel about paranormal investigation. Please remember me. Please don't let her erase me completely. I'm still here, still trapped, still trying to prove that consciousness survives death. But now I'm the evidence, and no one believes I exist. The Hotel del Coronado has since restricted access to room 3327, but the recordings Rachel made that night continue to circulate online, studied by scientists, paranormal investigators, and anyone trying to understand the terrifying implications of what happens when the dead don't just want to communicate with the living, they want to replace them entirely, stealing not just their bodies, but their entire existence, leaving the original consciousness trapped in the same spiritual prison that had held them for over a century.